Bored in an elegant restaurant, a businessman decides to make an unusual bet. "I'll marry the first woman who walks through that door." When the door opened, everyone laughed, and the businessman was paralyzed. It was a young, homeless woman. But this journey of love surprised everyone. The Le Pavillon restaurant sparkled like a jewel in the New York night. Its golden lights reflected off the windows of neighboring skyscrapers, creating a spectacle of opulence that attracted the cream of New York society. Among the tables with immaculate white tablecloths and gleaming silver cutlery sat Richard Mercer, one of the most powerful and controversial businessmen in the country. At 45, Richard was the personification of success. His investment empire spanned several continents, but there was a shadow in his brown eyes that all the money in the world couldn't dispel. He absently twirled the glass of red wine in his hand, watching the dark liquid dance against the fine crystal. "You've got that look again, Richard," commented Michael, his lawyer and longtime friend, sitting across from him. "What's bothering you this time?" "Some complicated business deal." Richard let out a heavy sigh, placing the glass on the table with a little more force than he intended. "Business? No. Business is going well. It's something else." Michael leaned forward, intrigued. He had known Richard for years and rarely saw him so disturbed. "Come on, spit it out. What could be bothering the great Richard Mercer?" "An heir, Michael." "A male heir?" Richard spoke, his voice low but laden with frustration. "You know I come from a traditional family. My father, my grandfather, they all passed the business from father to son, and I have no one to leave this legacy to." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying his friend. "But what about Emily? Your daughter is brilliant, Richard. She could easily—" "It's not the same," Richard interrupted, his voice rising slightly. Some customers at nearby tables turned their heads, curious. Noticing this, he lowered his tone. "I love Emily, you know that. But that's not how things work in my family. It has to be a man." Michael shook his head, silently disapproving. "Richard, we're in the 21st century. That mentality is outdated, sexist." Richard completed with a bitter smile. "I know. Believe me, I know. But I can't shake it. It's like I'm failing generations of Mercers." Silence fell over the table, heavy as lead. Michael observed his friend, concerned. He knew Richard's obsession with a male heir well. It was this same obsession that destroyed his marriage to Sarah almost a year ago. "And Sarah," Michael ventured, mentioning the name of Richard's ex-wife. "You could try a reconciliation, maybe." Richard laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Sarah? She's better off without me, Michael. I hurt her too much with this obsession of mine. She deserves someone better." At that moment, a waiter approached to refill their glasses. Richard took advantage of the pause to look around the restaurant, his eyes wandering over tables filled with elegant couples and groups of executives at business dinners. Suddenly, a crazy idea began to form in his mind. "You know something, Michael?" he said, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "I'm tired of waiting for fate. I'm going to take the reins of the situation." Michael raised an eyebrow, well aware of that tone. "What do you have in mind?" Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "A bet. Here and now. I'm going to marry the next woman who walks through that door." He pointed to the restaurant entrance. Michael choked on his wine. "Have you gone mad?" "Richard, that's insane." "Maybe," Richard shrugged, a mischievous smile on his lips. "But that's exactly what I'm going to do. The next woman who comes in will be my wife, no matter who she is." "And if it's an 80-year-old lady," Michael teased, still incredulous. "Then I'll have a very wise wife," Richard replied, laughing. Michael shook his head, torn between amusement and concern. "Richard, you can't be serious. This is—" But before he could finish, the restaurant door opened. Both men turned their heads, expectant. For a moment it seemed that time had frozen. A figure entered the restaurant, but it was nothing like what they expected. It was a woman, yes, but far from Le Pavillon's usual clientele. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes dirty and torn. She looked around, clearly disoriented and frightened. "My God," Michael murmured, "she's homeless. How did she get in here?" Richard didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the newcomer, his expression a mixture of shock and something else. Determination. Curiosity. Before either of them could say anything more, Two restaurant security guards were already moving towards the woman, ready to escort her out. It was then that Richard abruptly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Wait," he called, his voice echoing through the now silent restaurant. All eyes turned to him, including those of the frightened woman. Richard walked towards her, ignoring the shocked looks of the other patrons. "Mr. Mercer," one of the security guards began. "Don't worry, we'll—" "No," Richard interrupted him, his voice firm. "This lady is my guest." A murmur of astonishment ran through the restaurant. The woman looked at Richard, her eyes wide with surprise and distrust. Richard extended his hand to her, a gentle smile on his face. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Richard Mercer. Would you like to join me for dinner?" The woman hesitated, looking from Richard's outstretched hand to his face and back. Finally, with a mixture of fear and hope in her eyes, she placed her dirty, calloused hand in his. "My name is Rachel," she said, her voice hoarse and low. "Rachel Davis." Richard nodded, his smile widening. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Rachel Davis. Welcome to Le Pavillon." As Richard guided Rachel back to his table, under the astonished gazes of everyone in the restaurant, Michael watched the scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. He had known Richard for years, but had never seen him do anything so impulsive, so crazy. "My God," Michael muttered to himself, "what has he gotten himself into now?" Meanwhile, across town in a small apartment in Brooklyn, Sarah Almond, Richard's ex-wife, was preparing for bed. She had no idea that, at that very moment, her ex-husband was about to make a decision that would change not only his life, but hers too in ways that neither of them could imagine. Fate had cast its dice, and now all that remained was to see how the game would unfold. The sun had barely risen when Sarah Almond woke up, her eyes slowly opening to the new day. For a brief moment she lay there, watching the golden rays filtering through the slats of the blinds. It was a ritual she had developed over the past few months, these few minutes of peace before facing the world. At 38, Sarah was in the process of rebuilding her life. The divorce from Richard, finalized almost a year ago, still left its marks, but she was determined to move forward. With a sigh, she got up, put on her slippers, and walked to the kitchen of the modest apartment she now called home. As she prepared her breakfast, Sarah reflected on how her life had changed. From luxurious halls and extravagant parties, she now found comfort in the simplicity of her new routine. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, bringing a smile to her lips. "Good morning, Mum," a sleepy voice greeted her. Emily, her 16-year-old daughter, entered the kitchen, her hair tousled and still in pajamas. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sarah replied, pouring a cup of coffee for her daughter. "Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded, taking the cup gratefully. "Yeah, but I'm still nervous about today's presentation." Sarah smiled, recognizing the anxiety in her daughter's eyes. Emily had always been a dedicated student, inheriting her father's intelligence and determination. "You'll do great, Em. You've studied hard for this." The two shared a moment of comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah couldn't help but notice how Emily was growing up, becoming a strong and independent young woman. It was a source of pride, but also a twinge of sadness. Her baby was growing up so fast. "Mum," Emily began hesitantly, breaking the silence. Have you been talking to Dad?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. She and Richard had maintained a cordial relationship for Emily's sake, but interactions were minimal and usually through lawyers or assistants. "No, honey, why? Did something happen?" Emily bit her lip, a habit she'd had since childhood when she was worried. "Not exactly. It's just that, well, I saw some news online about him last night. Seems like he caused a stir at some fancy restaurant." Sarah frowned, reaching for her phone to check the news. Her eyes widened as she read the sensational headlines. "Tycoon Richard Mercer causes scandal by dining with homeless woman at Le Pavillon." "My God," Sarah murmured, quickly scrolling through the news. "What has he done this time?" Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in Richard's luxurious penthouse apartment, the atmosphere was tense. Rachel Davis, the woman he had invited to dinner the night before, was sitting rigidly on an Italian leather sofa, looking completely out of place amidst the surrounding luxury. Richard entered the living room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Rachel, who accepted it with trembling hands. "So, Rachel," Richard began, sitting in an armchair facing her, Tell me about yourself. Rachel looked at him, her eyes a mixture of fear and distrust. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice low but firm. Why did you bring me here? What do you want from me? Richard sighed, placing his cup on the coffee table. How to explain the madness that led to this situation? How to justify a decision made in a moment of desperation and impulsiveness? Rachel, I know this seems crazy, and maybe it is, he admitted. But last night, I made a promise to myself. A promise that, as absurd as it may seem, I intend to keep. He paused, studying her reaction. Rachel remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I promised I would marry the next woman who entered that restaurant, and that woman was you. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel looked at Richard as if he had just told her he was an alien from Mars. You're crazy, she finally said, her voice a horrified whisper. Richard couldn't help but laugh. Yes, I probably am, but I'm serious, Rachel. I want to marry you. Rachel stood up abruptly, almost spilling her coffee. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but I don't want to be part of it. Let me go. Richard also stood up, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Please, Rachel, calm down. I know this seems crazy, but I swear my intentions are sincere. I'm not trying to hurt you or deceive you. Rachel stared at him, her eyes full of distrust. Why? Why would you do this? You don't know me. I'm nobody. You are somebody, Rachel, Richard said softly. We all are. And as for why, well, let's say I'm at a point in my life where I need a drastic change. And you, Rachel Davis, might be exactly the change I need. Rachel shook her head, incredulous. This is madness. You're rich, famous. You could have any woman you wanted. Why would you choose someone like me? Richard took a step towards her, his eyes fixed on hers. Because maybe it's time to look beyond appearances, to give the unexpected a chance. Rachel, I'm offering you an opportunity. A chance to change your life and mine too. For a long moment, Rachel was silent, her eyes studying Richard's face, looking for any sign of falsehood. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling but determined. And if I say yes, what happens then? A slow smile spread across Richard's face. Then, Rachel Davis, we get married. And we start a new life together. Meanwhile, back at Sarah's apartment, the phone rang. It was Michael, Richard's lawyer and friend. Sarah, he said, his voice laden with concern. We need to talk about Richard. He did something, well, you won't believe it when I tell you. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Despite everything they had been through, a part of her still cared about Richard. And now it seemed he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. What did he do this time, Michael? She asked, dreading the answer. On the other end of the line, Michael hesitated. He's planning to get married to a woman he met last night. A homeless woman. Sarah almost dropped the phone. He what? As Michael began to explain the events of the previous night, Sarah felt the world spinning around her. She knew Richard could be impulsive, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. And so, in a matter of hours, the lives of Richard, Rachel, and Sarah had been turned upside down. Fate had cast its dice, and now it remained to be seen how this unlikely game would unfold. The afternoon sun bathed the busy streets of New York when Sarah hurriedly exited the subway. Her heart was racing, a mixture of concern and indignation pulsing through her veins. Michael's words still echoed in her mind. Richard, her ex-husband, was planning to marry a stranger, a homeless woman he had met the night before. With determined steps, Sarah headed towards the imposing building where Richard's office was located. She knew she no longer had any right over his decisions, but she couldn't stand by while he committed what seemed to be the biggest mistake of his life. Upon reaching the office reception, she was greeted by curious looks and whispers. Clearly, the news about Richard's eccentric behavior had already spread. Mrs. Almond, the receptionist greeted her with a tense smile. Mr. Mercer isn't expecting visitors today. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. Please, let him know I'm here. It's urgent. After a brief phone call, the receptionist nodded reluctantly. You can go up, ma'am. He'll receive you in his office. The elevator seemed to move in slow motion as Sarah ascended to the top floor. When the doors opened, she was greeted by Michael, who seemed relieved to see her. Sarah, I'm glad you came, he said, guiding her down the hallway. Maybe you can talk some sense into him. Before Sarah could respond, Richard's office door opened. He was there, impeccably dressed as always, but with an expression that mixed surprise and resignation. "Sarah," he said, his voice controlled. "What are you doing here?" Sarah entered the office, her eyes scanning the familiar environment before settling on Richard. "What am I doing here? Richard, have you completely lost your mind? Marrying a stranger, a homeless woman?" Richard sighed, closing the door behind her. "I see news travels fast." "Don't change the subject," Sarah retorted. "What are you thinking? This is madness even for you." For a moment, Richard looked tired, older than his years. He sat heavily in his chair, gesturing for Sarah to do the same. "Sarah, I know it seems crazy, but I need to do this." "Need to? Why? Because of this ridiculous obsession with a male heir?" Sarah asked, her voice laden with frustration. "Richard, we have a wonderful daughter. Emily is intelligent, capable." "This has nothing to do with Emily," Richard interrupted, his voice rising. "I love our daughter. You know that." "Then why?" Sarah insisted. "Why marry a complete stranger?" Richard was silent for a moment, his eyes lost in the view of the city through his office window. Because I need a change, Sarah. I need to do something different, something that takes me out of this empty routine I find myself in." Sarah observed him, feeling a mixture of pity and frustration. "And you think marrying a stranger will fill that void?" "I don't know," Richard admitted. "But I know I can't continue as I am. And Rachel, she's different from anyone I've ever met." "Rachel," Sarah repeated the name, feeling an inexplicable pang in her chest. "So that's her name?" Richard nodded. "Rachel Davis. She has a story, Sarah. A strength you wouldn't imagine." Sarah shook her head, incredulous. "Richard, you've known her for less than 24 hours. How can you say that?" "Sometimes a moment is enough to change everything," Richard replied, his gaze meeting Sarah's. For an instant, both were transported back to the past, to the day they met, so many years ago. The moment was broken by the sound of a knock on the door. Michael entered, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to interrupt, but—" Michael entered, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to interrupt, but she's here." Richard stood up immediately. "Rachel, where is she?" "In the reception," Michael answered. "She insisted on coming here, said she needed to talk to you." Sarah observed the change in Richard's demeanor. His eyes lit up in a way she hadn't seen in years. "Bring her here, Michael," he said. Minutes later, the door opened again. Sarah turned, her heart racing as she saw the woman entering the office. Rachel Davis was a surprising sight. Despite her simple clothes and disheveled hair, there was a dignity in her bearing, a strength in her eyes that couldn't be denied. She looked around the office with a mixture of admiration and distrust until her gaze landed on Sarah. "Who are you?" Rachel asked, her voice firm despite her evident nervousness. Before Sarah could respond, Richard stepped forward. "Rachel, this is Sarah Almond, my ex-wife." The silence that followed was laden with tension. The two women studied each other, each trying to understand the other's role in this surreal situation. "Ex-wife?" Rachel repeated, her gaze alternating between Richard and Sarah. "You didn't mention an ex-wife." "There wasn't time," Richard tried to explain. "Rachel, No," Rachel interrupted him, raising a hand. "Don't try to explain. I came here to say that I can't do this, I can't marry you." The declaration caught everyone by surprise. Richard took a step towards her. "Rachel, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Rachel said, her voice trembling slightly. "This was a mistake from the beginning. You don't know me, I don't know you. This isn't a fairy tale, Mr. Mercer. Real life doesn't work like that." Sarah watched the scene unfold, feeling a confused mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to feel relief that Rachel had come to the same conclusion she had. But another part, a part she didn't want to admit, felt a twinge of, what? Jealousy? Concern? "Rachel," Richard tried again, his voice softer now. "I know this is crazy, I know it seems impossible, but I really believe we can make this work." Rachel shook her head, tears shining in her eyes. "You don't understand. I have my own problems, my own baggage. I can't just enter your life and pretend everything will be okay." It was at this moment that Sarah surprised herself by doing something she never imagined. She stepped forward, placing herself between Richard and Rachel. "Rachel," she said softly, "can I talk to you?" "Just us two." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. Sarah glanced at Richard and Michael. "Give us a moment, please." When the men reluctantly left the office, Sarah turned to Rachel. "Look, I know this situation is absurd. Believe me, I think so too, but I've known Richard for a long time, and I've never seen him look at someone the way he looks at you." Rachel blinked, surprised. You're encouraging me to marry your ex-husband?" Sarah laughed softly. "Believe me, I'm as surprised as you are, but maybe this is exactly what Richard needs, what you both need." The two women stared at each other for a long moment, a silent understanding passing between them. Finally, Rachel spoke. I don't know what to do." Sarah smiled gently. "Nobody does, Rachel. But sometimes we have to take a leap of faith." Meanwhile, outside the office, Richard paced back and forth, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't know what Sarah was saying to Rachel, but he knew that somehow this moment would change the course of all their lives. And so in that office atop a New York skyscraper, the fate of 3 people was about to be decided. What would happen next, no one could predict. The silence that hung in Richard's office was almost palpable. Outside, Richard and Michael waited anxiously, while inside, Sarah and Rachel continued their unexpected conversation. Rachel looked at Sarah, her eyes full of doubt and confusion. "Why are you doing this? Why are you encouraging me?" Sarah sighed, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of frustration. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe it's crazy, but I know Richard. I know how stubborn and obsessed he can be. If he's decided to do this, nothing will stop him." "So you think I should accept out of resignation?" Rachel asked, a tone of bitterness in her voice. "No," Sarah answered quickly. "That's not it. It's just that maybe, just maybe, this could be good for both of you. Richard needs someone to challenge him, to make him see the world in a different way. And you, Rachel, well, you deserve a chance to change your life if that's what you want." Rachel was silent for a moment, absorbing Sarah's words. Finally, she spoke. "And if I'm not what he expects? What if I disappoint him?" Sarah couldn't help but smile slightly. "Believe me, Rachel, you've already exceeded any expectation Richard might have had. You're here, aren't you? Facing this crazy situation with more courage than many would have." The two women looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Finally, Rachel nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'll try, but on one condition." "Which is?" Sarah asked, curious. "I want you to be around," Rachel answered. "I don't know anything about this world, about how to deal with someone like Richard. I need someone who understands, who can guide me." Sarah was surprised by the request, but felt a wave of empathy for Rachel. "All right," she agreed. "I'll be here for you, Rachel. I promise." With that decided, they called Richard and Michael back into the office. The two men entered, their faces a mask of anxiety and expectation. "So?" Richard asked, his gaze alternating between Rachel and Sarah. Rachel took a deep breath before speaking. "I accept, Mr. Mercer. I will marry you." Richard's face lit up with a smile, but before he could speak, Rachel raised a hand, interrupting him. "But I have conditions," she continued. "First, I want you to understand that this isn't a fairy tale. Don't expect me to turn into a princess overnight. I am who I am, and that's not going to change just because you have money." Richard nodded solemnly. "I understand and respect that, Rachel. Second," Rachel went on, "I want Sarah to be involved in this process. She knows you. She knows this world. I need someone who can guide me." This condition caught Richard by surprise. He looked at Sarah, who nodded in confirmation. I think that can be arranged," Richard said slowly. "If Sarah agrees, of course." "I do," Sarah confirmed. "I'll do what I can to help." Michael, who had been observing the scene in silence, finally spoke. "Well, it seems we have an agreement then. Should I start preparing the marriage papers?" Richard nodded, but Rachel interrupted him again. "Not so fast. Before we sign anything, I want to get to know Richard better. And I want him to get to know me too. Can we have a courtship period, let's say?" "Of course," Richard quickly agreed. "How long do you think we need?" Rachel thought for a moment. 3 months. If after 3 months we still want to go through with this, then we'll get married." Everyone in the room agreed with the proposal. It was a surreal situation, but somehow it seemed like the most sensible course of action given the circumstances. In the days that followed, the lives of everyone involved underwent a drastic transformation. Rachel was installed in an apartment near Richard's, with Sarah helping her adapt to her new reality. Clothes were bought, Etiquette classes were arranged, and slowly Rachel began to familiarize herself with Richard's world. For Richard, it was a period of self-discovery. He found himself fascinated by Rachel's strength and determination, by her unique perspective on life. Each conversation, each shared moment, made him question his priorities and values. Sarah, in turn, found herself in an unexpected position. She became a sort of mentor to Rachel, helping her navigate the intricate social codes of Richard's world. At the same time, she found herself reflecting on her own past, on the years she shared with Richard, and what she really wanted for her future. One afternoon, about a month after the agreement, Sarah was having coffee with Jake, the teacher she had met a few months earlier. They had grown closer in recent times, finding comfort and understanding in each other. "So," Jake said, putting his cup on the table, "how are things with this whole situation?" Sarah sighed, a tired smile on her lips. "It's crazy, Jake. Sometimes I wonder how I ended up in the middle of all this." Jake watched her affectionately. "You know you don't have to do this, right? It's not your responsibility to take care of your ex-husband and his new fiancé." "I know," Sarah replied, "but somehow I feel like I need to do this for Rachel mainly. She needs someone on her side." Jake nodded, understanding. "You've always cared too much about others, Sarah. It's one of the things I admire most about you." Sarah felt her heart race at Jake's words. There was something growing between them, something she wasn't ready to name yet, but that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Jake," she said softly, "for understanding, for being here." He smiled, covering her hand with his. "I'll always be here, Sarah, no matter what happens." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Richard and Rachel were walking side by side in a park. It was a sunny day, and Rachel still marveled at the freedom of simply strolling without worrying about where she would sleep or what she would eat. "Richard," she said, suddenly stopping walking, "why are you really doing this?" "Why me?" Richard looked at her, surprised by the direct question. He thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly, Rachel, at first it was out of desperation, out of a crazy need to change my life. But now it's because I see something in you, a strength, a perspective I've never had. You make me want to be a better person." Rachel studied him, looking for any sign of falsehood in his words. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I still don't know if this is going to work, Richard, but I'm willing to try." Richard smiled, extending his hand to her. Rachel hesitated for a moment before accepting it. Together they continued their walk, two different worlds uniting in an uncertain future, but full of possibilities. And so, as the sun set over New York, the lives of Richard, Rachel, and Sarah continued to intertwine in ways none of them could have predicted. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would be the same as before. Richard's luxurious penthouse apartment was filled with animated voices and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was a gala night, organized to introduce Rachel to New York's high society. 2 months had passed since the unusual agreement, and Rachel's transformation was remarkable, at least externally. Dressed in an elegant navy blue dress, Rachel circulated through the room with newly acquired grace. Her etiquette lessons and Sarah's guidance had paid off, and she managed to maintain polite conversations with the guests, even if her gaze occasionally betrayed an underlying discomfort. Richard observed her from afar, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a proud smile on his lips. He couldn't deny that he was impressed with Rachel's progress. However, a part of him wondered if this transformation was really what he wanted. "She's doing well, isn't she?" Sarah's voice surprised him. She had arrived at his side without him noticing, elegant in a black dress. Richard nodded. "Yes, she is. You've done an amazing job with her, Sarah." Sarah shrugged, her eyes fixed on Rachel. "She already had all of this inside her, Richard. I just polished the edges a bit." The two were silent for a moment, watching Rachel interact with the guests. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence. "Richard, are you sure this is what you want? Transforming Rachel into someone like us?" The question caught Richard by surprise. He turned to face his ex-wife, frowning. "What do you mean?" Sarah sighed, carefully choosing her words. "It's just that part of what attracted you to Rachel was precisely the fact that she was different, wasn't it? Her authenticity, her unique perspective on life. Aren't you afraid of losing that in the process?" Sarah's words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He had never considered things from that angle. Before he could respond, however, they were interrupted by one of the guests, an important real estate businessman. "Richard, my dear," the man exclaimed, patting Richard on the back. "What a wonderful party. And your fiancée? Well, she's simply charming. You must be very proud." Richard forced a smile. "Thank you, Charles. Yes, Rachel is... she's amazing." While the men talked about business, Sarah moved away, her eyes searching for Rachel among the crowd. She found her near the bar, looking a bit lost. "Hey," Sarah said softly, approaching. "How are you holding up?" Rachel let out a sigh of relief at seeing a familiar face. "Honestly, I'm exhausted." "How do you do this all the time?" Sarah laughed, grabbing 2 glasses of champagne and offering one to Rachel. "Years of practice, dear, but don't worry, you're doing very well." Rachel gratefully accepted the glass, taking a sip before speaking again. "Sarah, can I ask you a question?" "Of course," Sarah replied, noticing the seriousness in Rachel's tone. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? With Richard, with all of this?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with weight. Sarah thought carefully before answering. "Rachel, only you can answer that. But what I can say is, don't lose who you are in this process." It was that authentic Rachel who caught Richard's attention, who made him want to change his life. "Don't let this world transform you into someone you don't recognize." Sarah's words seemed to touch something deep in Rachel. Her eyes filled with unshed tears. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in this whirlwind, as if the Rachel I was is disappearing a little more each day." Sarah put a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Then maybe it's time to take a step back, to remember who you are and what you really want." At that moment, Richard approached them, his face lit up by a smile. "Ah, there you two are. Rachel, darling, there are some people I want you to meet." Rachel exchanged a quick look with Sarah before forcing a smile. "Of course, Richard. I'm coming." As Richard guided Rachel back to the middle of the guests, Sarah watched them, a feeling of unease settling in her chest. She couldn't help but wonder if this story would have a happy ending. Across the room, Emily, Richard, and Sarah's daughter observed the scene with a mixture of fascination and concern. At 16, she was perceptive enough to notice the underlying nuances and tensions of the situation. "It's strange, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Emily turned to see Jake, her mother's new boyfriend, who had discreetly arrived at the party. "What?" Emily asked, although she already knew the answer. Jake made a sweeping gesture with his hand. "All of this. Your father, this woman. Your mother in the middle of it all." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, it's strange, but it's also, I don't know, interesting, in a way." Jake studied the young girl's face for a moment. "How are you dealing with all of this, Em?" The question caught Emily by surprise. She was so used to being the silent observer that rarely did anyone ask her opinion on the situation. I don't know," she admitted. "It's confusing. Part of me wants to hate Rachel for taking my mother's place, but then I see how she's trying to fit in, how lost she seems sometimes, and I feel sorry for her." Jake nodded understandingly. "It's a complicated situation for everyone involved." "And you?" Emily asked, turning to face him. "How do you feel about all of this?" Jake seemed surprised by the direct question. He thought for a moment before answering. "I worry about your mother. She's so involved in helping Rachel, in trying to make things work. Sometimes I wonder if she's forgetting to take care of herself." Jake's words touched something in Emily. She looked at her mother, who was now talking with some guests, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Maybe we can help her," Emily suggested hesitantly. "You know, remind her that she deserves to be happy too." Jake smiled, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "That would be great, Em. Your mother is lucky to have you." As the party continued around them, Emily felt a new determination grow within her. Maybe it was time for her to play a more active role in this complicated story as well. The night progressed, and with it, the underlying complexities and tensions of the situation continued to unfold. Richard, Rachel, Sarah, Emily, and Jake, each of them facing their own challenges, their own doubts and hopes. And so, as the moon rose in the New York sky, illuminating the city that never sleeps, the lives of these characters continued to intertwine, each seeking their place in this new and unexpected reality. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: The transformations were just beginning. The sun had barely risen when Rachel woke up, her body still not accustomed to the comfort of the king-size bed in the apartment Richard had rented for her. For a moment, she lay there staring at the ceiling and wondering, not for the first time, how her life had changed so drastically in just 2 months. With a sigh, she got up and walked to the window. The view of New York City stretched out before her, the first rays of sunlight reflecting off the windows of the skyscrapers. It was a view that still took her breath away, so different from the street she used to call home. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Rachel," Richard's voice called, "can I come in?" "Sure," she replied, turning to face him as he entered the room. Richard looked tired, as if he hadn't slept much. He approached Rachel, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about the party last night," he began, "about what Sarah said and about how you seemed." Rachel felt her heart race. "What do you mean?" Richard ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned he made when he was nervous. "Rachel, I think maybe we've lost our way. I wanted to give you the world, show you all the possibilities, but in the process, I think maybe we're losing what really matters." Richard's words caught Rachel by surprise. She observed him for a moment, trying to decipher the expression on his face. "Richard," she began slowly, "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but you're right. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing myself in this new world, that I'm becoming someone I don't recognize." Richard nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm sorry, Rachel. It was never my intention to make you feel that way. I wanted to give you everything." "I know," Rachel replied softly. "But maybe what I really need isn't fancy parties or expensive clothes. Maybe what I need is to be myself." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Richard spoke. "What do you want to do, Rachel? Be honest with me." Rachel took a deep breath, gathering courage for the words she knew she needed to say. I think I need some time, Richard. Time to think, to find myself again, to decide if this is really the path I want to follow." Richard seemed struck by Rachel's words, but nodded slowly. "I understand. And I respect your decision. You have every right to do what you think is best for you." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Sarah was sitting in her kitchen, an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. Her thoughts were distant, reliving the events of the previous night. "Mom?" Emily's voice pulled her from her reverie. "Is everything okay?" Sarah forced a smile for her daughter. "Of course, honey. I'm just a little tired from last night's party." Emily didn't seem convinced. She sat down next to her mother, her eyes full of concern. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Em. What is it?" Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. Do you still love Dad?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. She looked at her daughter, seeing not just curiosity, but also a maturity that went beyond her 16 years. "Oh, Em," Sarah sighed. "It's complicated. Your father and I share a history, a life together. There's a kind of love that will always exist between us, but it's not the kind of love that sustains a marriage." Emily nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. "And Jake? Do you love him?" Sarah felt her heart race at the mention of Jake. He's wonderful, Em. He makes me happy in a way I haven't felt in a long time." "Then why are you so involved with Dad and Rachel?" Emily asked, her voice soft but insistent. The question hit Sarah like lightning. She found herself at a loss for words for a moment, confronted with a truth she had been avoiding. I don't know, Em," she finally admitted. "I guess part of me feels like I need to help, to make sure everything works out, but maybe I'm getting too involved." Emily took her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "Mom, you deserve to be happy too. You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Emily's words brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She pulled her daughter into a tight hug, grateful for the wisdom and love of her girl. At that same moment, Jake was in his classroom at the university, preparing for his next class. His thoughts, however, were with Sarah. He picked up his phone, hesitating for a moment before typing a message. "Hey, just wanted to say I'm thinking of you. How about dinner tonight, just the two of us?" He sent the message, hoping he could offer Sarah a moment of peace amidst all the chaos. Back at Rachel's apartment, Richard was preparing to leave. He paused at the door, turning to look at Rachel one last time. "Rachel," he said softly, "no matter what you decide, know that I care about you, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Rachel felt her heart tighten at Richard's words. "I know, Richard, and I care about you too. That's why I need to make sure we're doing the right thing." Richard nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." With that, he left, leaving Rachel alone with her thoughts. She returned to the window, observing the city that had become her new home. So many things had changed in such a short time. Now she knew it was time to decide which path to follow. Meanwhile, on the streets of New York, life went on. People came and went, each with their own story, their own struggles and hopes. And in the midst of it all, the lives of Richard, Rachel, Sarah, Emily, and Jake continued to intertwine, each seeking their place, their path to happiness. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The decisions they would make in the coming days would shape not only their own lives, but also the lives of each other. And so, as the sun rose in the New York sky, illuminating the city with its promises and possibilities, each of them prepared to face the revelations and confrontations that were to come. The afternoon was falling over New York when Rachel stepped onto the streets of downtown. Dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt, she blended easily into the crowd of hurried passers-by. After weeks of living in the luxury provided by Richard, she felt a strange sense of comfort finding herself again amidst the bustle of the city. Rachel walked without a defined direction, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions and doubts. The last few weeks had been like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare disguised as a fairy tale. She wondered how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. Without realizing it, her steps led her to a familiar park. It was the same park where she used to sleep before meeting Richard. Rachel sat on a bench observing the people around her. Families strolling, couples holding hands, elderly people feeding pigeons. The normalcy of the scene made her smile, a feeling of nostalgia taking hold of her. "Rachel?" a familiar voice called, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Mike, an old companion from the streets, approaching with a hesitant smile. "Is it really you?" "I barely recognized you." Rachel felt a wave of emotion at seeing her old friend. "Mike, it's so good to see you." The two embraced, the familiarity of the gesture bringing tears to Rachel's eyes. "What happened to you?" Mike asked, sitting down beside her. "You disappeared suddenly. We were all worried." Rachel hesitated, unsure of how to explain the turnaround in her life. "It's a long story, Mike, a story almost impossible to believe." Meanwhile, in Richard's office, the businessman was immersed in his thoughts, barely paying attention to the pile of documents in front of him. The conversation with Rachel that morning still echoed in his mind. A knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. "Come in," he called, straightening up in his chair. To his surprise, it was Sarah who entered. "Richard," she said, her voice laden with concern, "we need to talk." Richard nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. "What's wrong, Sarah?" Sarah took a deep breath before speaking. "It's about Rachel, and about you, and, well, about this whole situation." Richard felt his body tense. "What about it?" "Richard," Sarah began, carefully choosing her words, "have you stopped to think about what you're really doing? The impact your actions are having not only on Rachel's life, but on your own?" Sarah's words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face. I just wanted to help, Sarah. Give Rachel a chance at a better life." "I know," Sarah replied softly. "Your intentions were good. But Richard, you can't just take someone out of their reality and expect them to adapt to yours. It's not fair to Rachel, and it's not fair to yourself." Richard was silent for a moment, absorbing his ex-wife's words. "Do you think I made a mistake?" he finally asked, his voice low and unsure. Sarah sighed. "It's not about right or wrong, Richard. It's about understanding that sometimes our actions, no matter how well-intentioned, can have consequences we didn't foresee." While this conversation was happening, Emily was at her school, sitting in a literature class. However, her mind was far from the verses of Shakespeare that the teacher was reciting. She couldn't help but think about her family, about how everything had changed in recent months. Next to her, her best friend Olivia noticed her distraction. "Em," she whispered, "is everything okay?" Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." Olivia didn't seem convinced, But before she could insist, the bell rang, announcing the end of class. As the students rose in a confusion of voices and movements, Olivia held Emily's arm. "Hey," she said, "how about we go get a milkshake after school? You seem like you need to talk." Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "That would be great, Liv. Thanks." Back at the park, Rachel was finishing telling her story to Mike. Her friend listened with a mixture of amazement and concern. "Wow, Rachel," Mike finally said. "That's unbelievable." Rachel gave a sad smile. "I know. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself." Mike was silent for a moment, processing everything he had heard. "And now?" he asked. "What are you going to do?" Rachel looked at the horizon where the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I don't know, Mike. Part of me wants to go back to Richard, to that life of comfort and possibilities. But another part misses this. The simplicity, the freedom." Mike put a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Only you can decide what's best for you, Rachel. But remember, true wealth isn't in what we have, but in who we are." Mike's words touched something deep in Rachel. She turned to look at her friend, feeling a wave of gratitude for his simple but profound wisdom. "Thank you, Mike," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I think I needed to hear that." As the sun set over New York, each of our characters found themselves at a crossroads. Richard, confronted with the consequences of his actions. Sarah, balancing between her past and her future. Emily, trying to understand her place amidst all this confusion. And Rachel, at the center of it all, trying to decide which path to follow. As night fell, bringing with it the promise of a new day, one thing was clear. The decisions they would make in the coming hours would shape not only their own destinies, but also the destinies of each other. And so, as the city lights began to come on, illuminating the streets of New York, each of them prepared to face the choices that awaited them. The future was uncertain, but one thing was certain. Nothing would be the same as before. The divergent paths that opened before them would lead to destinations that none of them could predict. And it was in this uncertainty that the true excitement of the journey they were about to embark on resided. Night had fallen over New York, and with it came a fine, persistent rain. In Sarah's apartment, the soft sound of rain against the windows created a melancholic atmosphere that perfectly matched the mood of the occupants. Sarah was sitting on the couch, a forgotten cup of tea in her hands, while Jake occupied the armchair beside her. The silence between them was comfortable, but laden with unspoken thoughts. "How did the conversation with Richard go?" Jake finally asked, his voice soft, breaking the silence. Sarah sighed, placing the cup on the coffee table. "It was, intense. I think I finally managed to make him see the impact of his actions." Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "And how are you feeling about all this?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. She had spent so much time worrying about Richard, Rachel, and Emily that she had barely stopped to consider her own feelings. I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels responsible for this whole situation, as if I had to fix things somehow." Jake leaned forward, taking Sarah's hand in his. "Sarah, you're not responsible for Richard's choices, nor for Rachel's. You've been incredibly generous with your time and energy, but maybe it's time to think about yourself." Jake's words hit Sarah like a ray of clarity amidst the confusion of the past few months. She looked at him, seeing not only understanding in his eyes, but also a deep and patient love. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been losing myself in all this. Maybe it's time to take a step back." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Richard was walking alone through the wet streets. The conversation with Sarah had affected him more than he would like to admit. For the first time in a long time, he found himself questioning not only his recent actions, but the entire trajectory of his life. His steps unconsciously led him to the park, where he used to take Emily when she was little. Sitting on a wet bench, Richard let the memories flood him. The sound of Emily's laughter, the warmth of Sarah's hand in his, the sense of completeness he felt in those simple moments. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, the raindrops mixing with the tears that began to fall. It was at this moment of vulnerability that his phone vibrated. It was a message from Rachel. "Can we talk? I'm at the apartment." Richard felt his heart race. Would this be the moment of truth? In a cozy cafe not far from there, Emily and her friend Olivia were sitting at a corner table, steaming cups of hot chocolate in front of them. "So," Olivia began, watching Emily carefully, "are you going to tell me what's going on?" Emily played with the spoon in her cup, avoiding her friend's gaze. "It's complicated, Liv. My family is a mess." Olivia waited patiently as Emily gathered the courage to continue. "My dad, he's about to get married again, to a woman he barely knows. And my mom, she's involved somehow, trying to help. And I feel lost in the middle of it all." Olivia reached out, holding Emily's hand. That sounds really tough. How are you dealing with all this?" Emily shrugged, feeling tears start to form. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I have to be the adult. Take care of my mom, worry about my dad, but other times I just wish everything would go back to the way it was before." Olivia squeezed Emily's hand, offering silent comfort. "You know you don't have to carry all this alone, right? I'm here for you, always." Olivia's words brought a small smile to Emily's lips. "Thanks, Liv. I don't know what I'd do without you." Back at the apartment Richard had rented for her, Rachel was standing by the window watching the rain fall. Her conversation with Mike in the park had awakened memories and feelings she thought she had left behind. The sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Richard entering, soaked by the rain. "Rachel," he said, his voice hoarse, "I came as soon as I got your message." Rachel observed him for a moment, noticing the vulnerability in his eyes, so different from the confident man she had met at the restaurant months ago. "Richard," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." Richard nodded, approaching her. "I agree. Rachel, I'm sorry. For everything." Rachel raised a hand, interrupting him. "No, Richard, don't apologize. You gave me an opportunity I never imagined having. But it's not what you want," Richard completed, a sad smile on his lips. Rachel nodded slowly. "It's not who I am, Richard. These past few weeks have been like a dream, but it's not my reality. It's not who I really am." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. Finally, Richard spoke. "I understand, Rachel, and I respect your decision. I think deep down, I always knew this couldn't last." Rachel took a step towards him, gently touching his face. "Richard, you're a good man with a huge heart, but you need to find happiness within yourself, not in someone else." Rachel's words hit Richard deeply. He closed his eyes, feeling the soft touch of her hand on his face. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel smiled, a genuine smile full of affection. "We move on, Richard. You back to your life, and I'm going to find my own path." As the night progressed, each of our characters faced their own reflections and decisions. Sarah, finding strength to think about herself. Richard, confronting the consequences of his actions and the reality of his feelings. Emily, learning to deal with the complexities of adult life, and Rachel choosing her own path, regardless of others' expectations. The rain continued to fall over New York, washing the streets and bringing with it the promise of a new beginning. And so, as the city slept, our characters prepared to face the dawn, each of them a little wiser, a little stronger, and ready to write the next chapter of their lives. The day dawned in New York with a clear and bright sky, as if the previous night's rain had washed away not just the streets, but also the souls of its inhabitants. In Sarah's apartment, the first rays of sunlight found her already awake, sitting on the balcony with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The conversation from the previous night with Jake still echoed in her mind. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to think about herself, her own desires and needs. She picked up her phone, hesitated for a moment, and then typed a message to Richard. "We need to talk about our involvement in this situation. Can we meet today?" Not far away, Richard was waking up in his own apartment. The night had been long and full of reflections after his conversation with Rachel. He felt strangely light, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When he saw Sarah's message, he felt a mixture of apprehension and relief. "Of course," he replied. "Lunch at our old favorite restaurant?" Meanwhile, in her small rented apartment, Rachel was busy packing her things. She looked around at the expensive dresses and luxurious accessories that Richard had bought for her. With a sigh, she set them aside, opting to take only what she had brought with her on the day she met Richard. A knock on the door surprised her. When she opened it, she found Emily, Richard, and Sarah's daughter. "Emily," Rachel said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" The teenager looked nervous but determined. I wanted to talk to you before you left." Rachel nodded, inviting her in. Emily looked around the apartment, noticing the half-packed suitcases. "So it's true," she said softly. "You're leaving." Rachel sat on the sofa, gesturing for Emily to do the same. "Yes, it's true. Emily, No," Emily interrupted her. "Please, let me speak first." Rachel nodded, surprised by the maturity in the young girl's voice. "I know this whole situation was strange," Emily began, "for all of us. At first, I didn't know what to think of you. Part of me wanted to hate you for entering my dad's life like this. But then I saw how you made him happy, how you challenged him to be a better person." Rachel felt tears forming in her eyes as Emily continued. "I wanted to thank you," the teenager said, "for showing my dad that there's more to life than money and success, and for showing me that sometimes people can surprise us in ways we never imagined." Rachel couldn't contain the tears that now flowed freely down her face. She reached out, holding Emily's hand. "Oh, Emily," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me. You're an amazing young woman, you know that?" Emily smiled, her own tears threatening to fall. "Will you be okay?" Rachel nodded, wiping away the tears. "I will. In fact, I think I'm going to be better than ever. I found a strength in me that I didn't know existed, thanks to this experience." The two talked for a while longer, sharing stories and laughter, until it was finally time for Emily to leave. "Take care, Rachel," Emily said, hugging her tightly. "And thank you for everything." Meanwhile, at the restaurant where they had arranged to meet, Richard anxiously awaited Sarah's arrival. When she entered, he couldn't help but notice how different she looked, lighter, more confident. "Hi, Richard," Sarah said, sitting at the table. "Hi, Sarah," he replied, a hesitant smile on his lips. "Thanks for coming." There was a moment of silence as they both studied the menu, more out of habit than necessity. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Richard, I've thought a lot about everything that's happened in the last few months, about my role in all of this." Richard looked at her, surprised by the seriousness in her voice. And I realized that I need to step away," Sarah said firmly. "I can't continue to be so involved in your life, Richard. It's not healthy for either of us." Richard felt a tightness in his chest, but he knew she was right. "I understand, Sarah, and I'm sorry for dragging you into this whole madness." Sarah shook her head. "Don't apologize. I chose to get involved. But now I'm choosing to move forward, to focus on myself, on Emily, on my relationship with Jake." Richard nodded slowly. "You deserve to be happy, Sarah. You always have." "You too, Richard," Sarah replied softly. "But you need to find that happiness within yourself, not in someone else." Sarah's words echoed Rachel's, and Richard felt a wave of clarity hit him. "You're right. I think I'm finally starting to understand that." They continued to talk throughout lunch, not as ex-husband and ex-wife, but as two old friends who were finally finding peace with their past and hope for the future. As the day progressed, each of our characters took steps towards their new horizons. Rachel, with her bag on her back, walked the streets of New York, no longer as a desperate homeless person, nor as a millionaire's fiancée, but as a strong and independent woman, ready to create her own destiny. Emily returned home, feeling more mature and understanding, ready to support her parents on their new paths. Sarah left the restaurant hand in hand with Jake, who was waiting for her outside, her heart full of love and gratitude for this man who supported her unconditionally. And Richard returned to his office, but with a new gleam in his eyes. He picked up the phone and made a call. "Hello, is this the homeless shelter? Yes, I'd like to make a donation. And I'd also like to know how I can volunteer to help." As the sun began to set over New York, tinging the sky with shades of orange and pink, our story reached a turning point. Each character had learned valuable lessons about love, authenticity, and the importance of being true to oneself. And although the future was still uncertain, there was a sense of hope in the air, a promise of better days to come. For sometimes, you need to get lost to really find yourself. And in the end, it's not the destination that matters, but the journey that takes us there. 6 months had passed since that rainy afternoon when lives were redirected and difficult decisions were made. Autumn was arriving in New York, painting the trees with shades of red and gold, a silent reminder that change, though sometimes painful, can be incredibly beautiful. In a small cafe in Brooklyn, Sarah waited anxiously. Her fingers drummed on the table, her eyes alternating between the door and her watch. When she finally saw the familiar figure entering the establishment, a smile lit up her face. "Rachel," she called, waving. Rachel approached, a warm smile on her face. The two women embraced, the familiarity of the gesture surprising them both. "It's so good to see you, Sarah," Rachel said, sitting down. "Thank you for inviting me." Sarah observed Rachel carefully. There was something different about her, a confidence, a serenity that wasn't there before. "You look great, Rachel. How have you been?" Rachel smiled, her eyes shining. "It's been amazing, actually. Difficult at times, but amazing." As they ordered their coffees, Rachel began to tell about the last few months. After leaving Richard's apartment, she had used the little money she had saved to rent a small room and enroll in a social work course. "I realized I wanted to help people who were in the situation I had been in," Rachel explained. "Give them the chance I had, you know?" Sarah nodded, feeling a wave of pride for this woman who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. "That's wonderful, Rachel. You've found your calling." Rachel agreed, her eyes filling with tears. "You know, Sarah, as crazy as that whole situation was, I'm grateful. Grateful to you, to Richard, even to Emily. You showed me that I was capable of more than I ever imagined." The two women continued talking, sharing stories and laughter. When they finally said goodbye, hours later, it was with the promise to keep in touch. On the other side of the city, in his company office, Richard was having an unusual meeting. Sitting across from him was Mike, Rachel's old street friend. "So, Mike," Richard said, leaning forward, "what do you think of the proposal?" Mike looked a bit uncomfortable in his borrowed suit, but his eyes sparkled with determination. "It's an incredible opportunity, Mr. Mercer. I don't even know how to thank you." Richard smiled, remembering how this idea had come about. After starting to volunteer at the shelter, he had realized that many of the homeless people had unexplored skills and talents. The idea for a training and employment program was born from there. "No need to thank me, Mike. You earned this on your own merit. Now shall we discuss the details of your new position as program coordinator?" Meanwhile, in a nearby park, Emily was sitting on a bench, watching children play. Beside her, Jake was reading a book, occasionally casting affectionate glances at her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her distant look. Emily smiled. "About how things have changed in the last few months. How we've all changed." Jake closed the book, giving his full attention to his stepdaughter. In recent months, they had developed a close relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. "And how do you feel about these changes?" he asked gently. Emily thought for a moment before answering. "Honestly, I feel good. Happy even. Seeing my mom happy with you. Seeing my dad finally finding a purpose beyond work. It's like everything has fallen into place, you know?" Jake nodded, putting an arm around Emily's shoulders. "Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? Sometimes things need to fall apart so we can build something better." At that moment, Emily's phone vibrated with a message from her father. "Hey, Princess, how about a family dinner tonight? I have news to share." Emily smiled, showing the message to Jake. "Looks like we're having a family dinner tonight. You're coming, right?" Jake pretended to think for a moment. I don't know. Depends on the menu." Emily playfully punched his arm, laughing. "Silly, come on, we have to let Mom know." As the day progressed, each of our characters prepared for the family dinner. Sarah at home hummed as she got ready, her heart light with the prospect of an evening with the people she loved. Richard, in his office, finalized the details of his new project, eager to share the news. Emily and Jake walked hand in hand through the city streets, chatting animatedly about the future. And in a small apartment on the other side of the city, Rachel prepared for her evening class, her heart full of gratitude and hope. She picked up a small frame on the bedside table, a photo of her with Sarah, Richard, and Emily, taken on a day in the park months ago. With a smile, she put the photo back in its place. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, "for everything." As the sun set over New York, tinting the sky with vibrant colors, our story reached a point of equilibrium. Each character had found their way, not despite the difficulties, but because of them. And although the future still held surprises, there was a shared certainty among all. Together they could face anything that came. For in the end, it's not the grand gestures or dramatic twists that define our lives, but the small moments of connection, understanding, and love. And on that night, as an unconventional family gathered for a meal, these moments abounded, silent promises of better days to come. Time, that relentless and wise master, continued its inexorable march. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at Le Pavillon, where a millionaire businessman made a bet that would forever change not only his life, but that of everyone around him. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and Central Park was filled with families enjoying the day. Among them, a peculiar group stood out, not for their appearance, but for the atmosphere of joy and unity that surrounded them. Richard, now with grey hair at his temples, pushed a stroller where his 6-month-old granddaughter slept peacefully, the fruit of the love between Emily and her husband, Lucas. Beside him, Sarah walked hand in hand with Jake, the two exchanging knowing looks that spoke of a mature and deep love. A little ahead, Emily played with her 3-year-old son, Michael, her laughter echoing through the park. She had become a confident and compassionate young woman, balancing her career as a child psychologist with her family life. "Grandpa," Michael shouted, running towards Richard, "tell that story again." Richard laughed, picking up his grandson. "Which story, champ?" "The one about the princess who wasn't a princess," Michael replied, his eyes shining with expectation. Sarah and Jake exchanged knowing smiles. They knew exactly which story Michael was talking about. "Ah, that story," Richard said, sitting on a nearby bench. "Well, it all started on a rainy night." As Richard began to narrate a softened version of his story with Rachel, adapted for Michael's young ears, a familiar figure approached the group. "Sorry I'm late," Rachel called, waving as she approached. The years had been kind to Rachel. Her face, though marked by some expression lines, radiated a serenity and confidence that only comes with self-realization. "Rachel," Emily exclaimed, hugging her warmly, "I'm so glad you could come." Rachel smiled, returning the hug. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." After all, it's not every day we celebrate 5 years of such a special project. The project Rachel was referring to was the New Paths Foundation, a joint initiative created by Richard and Rachel to help homeless people rebuild their lives. What had begun as a small training and employment program had expanded into a nationwide organization, offering not only job opportunities, but also psychological support, education, and temporary housing. "Aunt Rachel!" Michael shouted, running to hug her legs. Although there were no blood ties, Rachel had become a constant and beloved presence in the family's life. "Hi, little one," Rachel said, bending down to hug him. "Was your grandpa telling that story again?" Michael nodded enthusiastically. "It's my favorite." The adults laughed, each silently remembering the real events behind the fairy tale that Richard was telling. As the group settled for a picnic, conversation flowed naturally, passing through light and deep topics. They talked about the foundation's work, about the challenges and joys of parenthood, about plans for the future. In a moment of calm, when the children were playing under the watchful eye of Emily and Lucas, Richard found himself sitting between Sarah and Rachel. "Who would have thought, huh?" he said softly, looking at the two women who had played such crucial roles in his life. "If someone had told me 5 years ago that we'd all be here like this," Sarah laughed, "no one would believe it. But here we are." Rachel nodded, her gaze sweeping over the group. "You know, sometimes I still wonder if all this is real, if I really deserved all this happiness." Richard took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this and much more, Rachel." "We all do," Sarah agreed, placing her hand over theirs. "It's true, and I think the most important thing is that we've learned to create our own happiness, haven't we?" The three were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Jake who broke the moment, approaching with a camera. "How about a photo to mark the occasion?" he suggested. Soon everyone was gathered, broad smiles on their faces as Jake adjusted the camera on the timer. He ran to join the group, placing himself next to Sarah. The flash went off, capturing that moment of pure happiness and unity. An unconventional family, united not by blood but by choice, by love, by a destiny that none of them could have predicted. Later, when the sun began to set and it was time to leave, Each carried with them not only memories of that perfect day, but also a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought them there. Richard, looking at the group as they walked towards the cars, felt his heart fill with an emotion he couldn't name. It was more than happiness, more than contentment. It was the feeling of being exactly where he should be, surrounded by the people he loved most. As the stars began to dot the New York sky, our story came to an end. But like every good story, this wasn't really an end, but a new beginning. For life, in all its unpredictable glory, continued, and for Richard, Sarah, Rachel, Emily, and all the others, the best was yet to come. Because in the end, it's not the destination that matters, but the journey. And what an incredible journey it had been.